Hello and welcome to Rooted and Unwithered. I am Cole Newton, and today is my 33rd birthday. And so the article that I'll be reading, I wrote 6 years ago on my 27th birthday. So this was February 9th, 2017. And the article is called Birthdays and Death Days. So teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. Psalm 90, verse 12. I really hope death is like sleep. The Bible often uses sleep as a symbolic way of speaking about death, so I really hope that they are more similar than we realize. Wouldn't it be nice to know that God causes us to need sleep each day as a way of preparing us for death? Maybe it's a lesson for how we should live our lives. After a hard day of fruitful work, sleep feels like heaven, but after lazy and unproductive days, going to bed is like pulling teeth. Maybe if we live our lives well and without regrets, death will be as restful as sleep. But I feel like I've gotten ahead of myself. Let's start again. Today is my 27th birthday, and supposedly 27 isn't one of those big ones. It's not like 25 when you realize that if you do make it to 75, you've already lived 1/3 of your life, and it isn't like 30 when your 4th decade of life begins. It's definitely not 50 when you try not to think too hard about your age being half a century. Each of those birthdays has the stigma of reminding us of our mortality. They remind us of what we strived so desperately to ignore, that regardless of what we do, time continues its downward spiral. But still, on this normal birthday, and for the past couple of weeks, I'm pondering my mortality and considering my inevitable death. It may seem dreary, and yeah, in some ways it is, but I think it's also both wise and necessary. You see, I've heard that Roman generals when they returned from Rome after a successful campaign, parades would be held in their honor, and they would ride through the streets of Rome in a chariot, basking in the city's celebration of their glory. Which sounds great, right? But in the midst of their triumph, a slave would remain behind the general whispering, "Memento mori," which is Latin for "remember that you will die." Despite all this momentary glory, a victorious general will die just like the most dishonored beggar on the street dies. As the great equalizer, remembering our inevitable death helps us to keep from delusions of grandeur, or, as the Bible quite simply calls it, pride. Jonathan Edwards. He had some resolutions that are fairly known to many Christians. He wrote 70 of them and read them to himself each week. When reading over them, it becomes clear that Edwards kept his death frequently in mind. So consider just a few of them. Resolution 7. Resolved never to do anything which I should be afraid to do as if it were the last hour of my life. Resolution 9. Resolved to think much on all occasions of my own dying and of the common circumstances which attend death. Resolution 17. Resolved that I will live so as I shall wish I had done when I come to die. Resolution 19. Resolved never to do anything which I should be afraid to do if I expected it would not be above an hour before I should hear the last trump. Edwards sought to live his life in such a way that he would have no regrets on his deathbed. But in order to do this, he needed to think about his death, and think about it often. Many of us like the idea of living like we are dying, but we don't actually want to think about dying. For all the death that is before us on the news and in video games, films, and television, we tend to shun any real thought about death. It's certainly understandable. The Bible tells us that death was not a piece of God's original design for creation. Genesis 3 shows death entering the world as a result of our sin. And God created us to live forever as his image bearers. But we rebelled because we wanted to be God, not be like him. We desired to possess the fullness of God's eternality, and God answered by reminding us that we are merely men via death. Furthermore, when Paul talks about our resurrection with Christ, he states that the last enemy to be destroyed is death. That's 1 Corinthians 15:26. Death is an enemy of humanity, and Christ will one day defeat it for good. So no wonder we hate death. No wonder we revolt against it. No wonder we feel cheated by the deaths of our loved ones, even though we know that it comes to all. No wonder we live our lives in denial of death, even though all of history and every funeral begs us to take a long, hard look into its eyes. No one wants to face their own mortality. But in Psalm 90, Moses teaches us that wisdom comes from understanding both our finiteness and God's eternality. Here's verses 1 through 12. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You return man to dust and say, Return, O children of man, for 1,000 years in your sight are as but yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. You sweep them away as with a flood. They are like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed. In the evening it fades and withers. For we are brought to an end by your anger. By your wrath we are dismayed. You have set our iniquities before us, our secret sins in the light of your presence. For all our days pass away under your wrath. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. The years of our life are 70, or by reason of strength, 80. Yet their span is all but toil and trouble. They are soon gone and fly away. Who considers the power of your anger and your wrath according to the fear of you? So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom. The psalm repeatedly contrasts God's infiniteness with our finiteness. God views 1,000 years just like we view yesterday. He is from everlasting to everlasting. We, on the other hand, typically have around 70 to 80 years of life. Therefore, Moses prays for God to teach us to count our days that we may have a heart of wisdom. He prays for the strength to face his own death that he might become wise. Wisdom is connected to understanding our mortality. We know this to be true. Without a healthy fear of death, people tend to behave foolishly. If a person rides a skateboard off the roof of their house, they will likely do so because they have not fully considered the fragility of their existence. And we call that type of behavior foolish. The realization of our mortality tends to keep us focused on the most important things in life. Living life with our deathbed in mind helps us to stop wasting time on frivolous or sinful things. After all, how many of us joyfully anticipate learning from God just how much time we spent watching television, scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, or binge watching Netflix? Few consider those essential activities for living a regret-free life. On the other hand, what if we truly understood that our days are numbered and that we are not guaranteed tomorrow? Would that not change the way we love our spouse or children? Would it not cause the priorities of today to shift? The heart of wisdom does not ignore or deny death. Wise men and women somberly but boldly look death in the face, praying for God's grace to keep them from wasting their limited time here on earth. The final verse of Psalm 90 reminds us that considering death is not a joyless task. In fact, Moses speaks of being satisfied by God and being glad and joyful all our days. Yes, thinking about our own death is a solemn activity, but solemnity does not negate joy. Yes, death must be faced with seriousness and gravity, but seriousness and gladness are not mutually exclusive. This life is a gift, and death reminds us that we do not have it for long. Only when we regularly number our days will we find the true hope that leads to eternal life. Only in facing death can we find surpassing joy even in the midst of sorrow, and continue praying with Moses for God to satisfy us and make our days glad. Here's how that psalm ends. Return, O Lord. How long? Have pity on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be shown to your servants and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Thank you so much for listening. For more articles and resources, please visit bcnewton.co. And until next time, grace and peace.